Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome Wallace Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Wallace.
Well, I'm sorry, Arnie. You probably caught me yawning there. It's kind of a dull day. We've just had 4 inches of snow, and it's not the most stimulating day today. So I guess I'm showing my I don't know, boredom, or whether it's actual tiredness or what it is. It's a psychological effect of the weather.
I bet it is. I bet it is. Yeah, we've got it pretty rough in Adelaide at the moment, Wally. Yesterday was 20, tomorrow's 20, and today's just going to pip up to 34 degrees. We're getting a northerly,
My
so
deepest, my deepest sympathies.
so we've been outside already this morning, terrorizing the chooks and the veggies, and just going for a walk around before the heat comes in. But
Hmm.
yeah, 20 and 20 and 34. That's an interesting sort of oscillation, just simply with the wind direction, because we live in the centre of Australia, on the coast, the southern parts, but north of us are the deserts. And so when the wind comes from
Yes.
the north, the preheat's done, and we can have quite a step change in temperature. So, okay, the subject for today, the very long lever of technology. I want to cut across to a website. There's actually several websites, but this one in particular, there was an article, a 172-page article, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, written by Klaus Schwab. And I was directed towards that. And so what I wanted to do was actually find out a little bit more about the other industrial revolutions. And I came across this comment in Wikipedia, and it was in regard to moving from water power to steam power. And in the United States, the rising from 5%, that is total energy harnessed, to 80% of the total power in the United States, it went from 5% to 80% in the years 1838 to 1860. 1838 to 1860. Now, there's another website there. It's in regard to a stationary steam engine, this Kohler steam engine. And it is fascinating because those particular articles, what they did, in my view, was they laid the groundwork for me to actually do some more scholarship. And the scholarship was, well, what was the first industrial revolution? And the best I can extract from the information that's out there, it was when people came together to produce items, but they worked as a community. They worked as a group, and so it was essentially an increment of association where you would call it the division of labour, where each was assigned a task, and each different task in order to produce the particular item. And so by working in this fashion, they were able to increase production. Now that was an interesting phenomena, that people working in community, the increment of association, that was the first industrial revolution. Your thoughts, Wally Klinck?
Well, in a sense, that's true, Arnie, because initially people simply they were hunters, and they were just simply operating as lone individuals primarily, although sometimes they might have worked together. But yes, when people become, they became agricultural and they started to live as communities and they did things more in cooperation, as you would say.
Hmm.
And the thing of it is, when you do things in cooperation, you tend to get what one might call a profit. There's an additional benefit.
Hmm.
And in social credit, we call that the increment of association.
Hmm.
And so the long history of mankind has been doing things in association and doing them in associations of increasing complexity, using increasingly complex tools, and gradually building up to the point where now we're functioning with very little actual human energy in terms of expenditure of actual ergs,
Hmm.
and we're able to have an absolutely incredible level of productivity.
Hmm.
The problems we face are not production; they are primarily distributive.
Hmm. That's right. And that's an interesting comment, Wally. And I'm going to build up that case as we go. The first industrial revolution was where people came together and there was a division of labour, the increment of association. There was a profit. The second industrial revolution, by my understanding, I gave you the article, was in regard to United States, where energy, which was historically either air, as in wind power, or it was water if you happened to be next to a river or something like that and you could harness that energy. And
Hmm.
between the years 1838 1860, steam energy went from 5% of the production energy used to 80% over this course of 22 years. So that was a significant increment, a significant technological increment. And it really did, in a lot of ways, take the yoke of labour off the back of man. Your thoughts, Wally Klinck?
Yeah, it lifted the burden of Atlas,
Mm-hmm,
going back to classical times,
mm-hmm,
and put it on the machine, on the device, on the tool,
mm,
rather than on human hands. And it was the beginning of an enormous progression of relief or release of mankind from the necessity of hard toil. And so we're kind of a moving, in a sense, back to the garden, if you want.
the Garden of Eden, that's right, yeah.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
one economist, actually. I think he was a Russian fellow some years ago. He described our technological advancements as a move back toward the garden.
Mm,
I don't know what his religious orientation was, but I thought it was a rather interesting statement on his part. I
yeah,
think it. I think that article was in the Scientific American,
okay. Yeah,
but
no,
it
that's,
is.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, that, no, that's an interesting, it's an interesting analogy that we move back to the Garden of Eden because the amount of energy that the individual would have to expend working behind a horse, working in the fields in order to produce. And I know the story of agriculture around this time was that 85% of all human labour was involved in agriculture around the 1850s. And as we see this industrial revolution taking place, this steam energy, what it means is that yes, you need a water supply, but you don't need to harness the power of the river. You actually need to harness the power of heat because the steam converting that heat into pressure, which of course drives the engine, and that in itself, when you think about it, was a phenomenal harnessing of power. And so man is moving away from actually having to provide the labour himself to actually becoming a catalyst. He harnesses the labour, he harnesses the energy, and he is minimising his labour, the hard work, minimising it more and more. The third industrial revolution, as I see it, was at the in the early 1914 era, 1900, 1914, and it was with the harnessing of electricity. And that meant that if the if you had giant boilers which were generating steam, they could convert steam into a turbine or reciprocating engine and drive a generator. And then the generator, not DC but rather AC power, could transmit across power lines, and then that energy became available wherever there were power lines. So if you like, the third industrial revolution was this decentralization of energy, the availability of energy in all sorts of different places, and so it really increased the lever of technology. It increased or it made it longer and longer and longer. Your thoughts, Wally Kling?
Well, yes, it did, and it extended productivity geographically or locationally. And Douglas made the comment that around the turn of the 19th century, we were on the cusp of a marvelous new civilization because he could see the potential. You know, he was born in 1879, and so he worked as a professional engineer. I would think through some times of considerable transition. Uh, he died in '52, so he saw a lot of transition that went on, and he realized the potential of technology for literally drastically revolutionizing our lives. And So it's been an amazing thing for humanity. I know that even in the 1800s, production, the agricultural involvement of the labor force went from about 75% to 25%, and now is around, as we've said before, I think around 3% in the
Hmm.
States.
Hmm.
And I mean, if you think about that, if you don't think about it, it means nothing to you. But if you think about it, and really think about it, it's a really profound thing.
Hmm.
It's released man to do so many other things. And so it's really a profound thing. It's changed the whole course of human history and destiny.
Hmm. Yeah. No,
And
that's yeah.
it's a marvelous thing, which I think we should be eternally grateful for when we know that we actually have the potential to change our lives, to enrich our lives
Hmm.
in this way. It's something to be enormously grateful for.
That's right. And the I guess the point I see in this, Wally, is that the the individual working in isolation is no longer in a sense like that. It really is part of communities. The communities actually can produce industries, and from those industries, a plenty is provided, an abundance is provided. We have an issue, and we've already highlighted that. You've highlighted that with distribution, absolutely. But what I'm attempting to illustrate in the forum this morning is that the productive multiplier has gone exponentially. It's logarithmic. It's essentially like a factor of 10. In what was once a horse and a man, or a beast and a man with a plough, has now moved in the course of 150, 250 years, has moved to the point where with steam energy, electrical energy, hydrocarbon energy, you've got this mass production where you can harvest an acre of property in just a couple of minutes. You can harvest an acre of property in just a couple of minutes if it happens to be where you can use these wide comb technologies and things like that. It's absolutely phenomenal. The fourth industrial revolution, we've gone from with people working together, division of labour, the introduction of steam energy. We've now gone to the introduction of electrical energy. And I would put an aside on that and highlight that it was also at the same time we had the car, the truck, the tractor were developed around this time, and so in a sense it's gone um, huge amounts of energy, and even a very simple car, 25 horsepower. Now at 25 horsepower, I think it's 22 men to a horsepower. So you're talking about 500 men power. One simple car generates the power of 500 men. Now, what we look at, what I call the fourth industrial revolution, and I've personally witnessed this through the 70s and the 80s, was where we started to use programmed logic controllers, PLCs, and that meant advanced control, automation, and now we see robotics. And man is clearly only a catalyst. He is only a catalyst to manage industry. The labour is not there. It's not part of it. You've always got a machine to do it. I saw my son the other day, and he's got a trailer. He's a tradesman, and with his ute and canopy in the back of the ute, plus the double axle trailer, he arrives at a building site or a work site with generators, compressors, docking saws, power tools, solar panels and batteries. He even has microwave and water tank so that he can actually stay there and prepare his own food on the job. And this is the technology that's available to a tradesman going to a building site or a work site. Multiple horsepowers. Really, the amount of energy that would be equivalent to perhaps 100 men he has at his disposal every single day, every single minute of that day. It's absolutely phenomenal. Wally Klinck.
Well, it is, Arnie, and believe me, I'm old enough that I have seen quite a transition because when I was born in the 30s, a lot of farming, this is in Canada,
Hmm.
was done by the horse. The horse was the primary source of energy.
Hmm.
I mean, I've driven horses to do plowing. I've been involved in harvesting and so on. They were bringing the big threshing machines in, and of course they had those giant steam-driven tractors that were introduced in the
Hmm.
prairies,
Hmm.
and they were quite imposing. They were very large and
Hmm.
almost scary to look at, but it was the beginning of a major shift. And then, of course, the war came along, and there was more and more development. We got into the modern automobile and trucks and so on, and tractors, which then were introduced to replace the horse. And then we had the problem of moving grain and so on. We would no longer have to shovel them, as I did, and quite a bit of shoveling of grain
Hmm.
in unhealthy, dusty conditions. And then they brought in power augers in order to move the grain into granaries,
Hmm.
and the whole elevator system was developed to handle vast amounts of grain, and it just was a continuous progression, of course, that took
Yeah.
place.
Hmm.
And I have seen changes that well, I certainly wouldn't go back to the old ways of doing it because it wouldn't be an easy life.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
We
that's.
used we used horses and buggies. I went to
Hmm.
school and sleighs and horse-drawn buggies.
Hmm.
We had an actual barn for the animals on the school site.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think young people today could even imagine from their experience what it was like in those days. It would be something unreal for them.
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting part about the research I've done this last week, Wallace, was that not only was it in energy, but it was also in methods of manufacture. I remember Henry Ford with his production line, but it was also in chemical manufacture, the development of and refining of steel products. And I was involved in oil and gas. And I can tell you that in the early days, oil and gas was essentially a batch process. And that was you had a giant vat and it was open to atmosphere, and then it would cascade to the next vat and the next vat and the next vat. And so you had independent heating sources. And then they went to towers and distillation columns and high density beds, and of course advanced controls, smart instruments, digital instruments. It got to the point where refining could happen in a tower that may have taken acres and acres of vats, and here they were doing it in a vertical fashion, and it was so sophisticated. And of course, as a consequence of that, refining or quality, the refining of the oil, the refining of the chemicals, became so accurate, so detailed, that of course the quality went through the roof. So here we've got not only by volume the capacity to manufacture, but also by quality. And I might highlight the tolerances of, say, the machining of tools. In the course of this, I was reading about in the Industrial Revolution, once the energy came into effect, then that energy was transferred onto equipment such as lathes and milling machines. And of course, the more energy that was directed towards these machines, the more accurate they became. And then the more quality, the higher standard. So we have gone through an absolutely phenomenal change in the last 250 years. And we've gone from just one person doing everything to communities producing vast amounts, paddocks and paddocks of automobiles, of trucks, of boats, of aeroplanes, of whatever. I mean, building homes, you can actually do a lot of the home building, construction in factories and just take the components to the building site and assemble them on the
Mm.
site. It's phenomenal what can and is being done. The point I'm getting at in all of this is that we have not touched on an area that needs to be reviewed and addressed, and that is this area of distribution. Wallace.
Yes, distribution is a key area of concern as you move away from hand production to production through non-labor devices and instruments and so on. I would just refer back there. I would say too that not only has the efficiency and so on of the production improved, but so has the safety of the production
Mhm.
improved. There have been enormous improvements in safety and in industrial reduction of industrial pollutants and so on. At one time, London was just absolutely a mess with soot.
Hmm.
The buildings were all coated. That's all been cleaned up. And you see, we have these people today who seem to be intent on actually driving back the course of industrial development, which has really been the factor that's made our lives more pleasant.
Hmm.
And they seem to be of the opinion that it should be almost destroyed. Some of them. It's Marxist inspired. It's some kind of a resentment, I think, of those maybe who feel that they don't have a secure future in the age of automation and so on.
Hmm.
And also, it's been the source of a resentment or envy that has been really played upon by the people who are motivating these younger people and so on.
Hmm.
It's not constructive; it's destructive, and it is not does not bode well for the future.
Hmm.
They should be concerned with improving what we have, not with deconstructing what we have.
Mm. Yeah, now that's an interesting phenomena, Wallace, because I know that to me it sounds like an either or. You either have technology in machines or you have to have something else in its place and going back to a previous time. But the fact is that I believe the resolution for this dilemma, for this is it quandary, paradox, whatever the word is,
Mm-hmm.
the answer to it is resolving the two together in the form of if you like, a suitable method of distribution. Then the abundance is there. The plenty is there. The fact that the machines, automation, robotics, steam energy, electrical, all these sorts of energy resources are available on tap, not on top. It's a completely different point of view. And it's so important that we actually look to resolving this issue, not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Wallace.
Absolutely, Arnie. It
Mm,
is critical. We have now come to that. In the early days, I mean, money was earned by work, human work. And that's the way you earned your living because you needed your work in order to get the financial income to buy what you needed to live on. Today, it's a totally different situation. Actually, workers are being displaced rapidly, and so we have a situation where there is a sense of maybe a sense of, well, certainly a sense of insecurity, a sense of being cast off and cast aside in a world where we have never learned how to distribute except by labor.
mhm,
And it is rather strange in a way, but it has to do with the Puritan work ethic. I mean, when you go outside and you breathe the fresh air, you don't feel guilty about breathing the fresh air and you don't put out any effort to earn the fresh air. If you come to a lovely stream, you can have a drink out of that stream and nobody charges you for it, not
mhm,
yet.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it's just so much that is provided to us, even before we were, so many forms of energy and everything was provided by nature itself, or providence or nature.
mhm,
If you're religious, you might say by God. But but the thing of it is, we have developed a system of concept of ownership, which seems to be from the early days confined to the idea of what is owned by the manufacturer, the producer, and no conception that ownership extends beyond to the society at large, depending upon the source of wealth.
mhm,
And if wealth is being produced by non-human sources, then surely, to goodness, we must transition to an awareness that every organism or every individual in society must be entitled to a portion of that wealth.
mhm,
Because if that wealth is not distributed, obviously the producer cannot survive.
mhm,
He must sell his product.
mhm,
And so it's an advantage to the producer that we have a mechanism to allow society to acquire his product and allow him to recover his financial costs
mhm,
and to remain solvent and to continue serving the community.
Yeah,
So some people are very upset about the idea of anyone getting for nothing. But we can move to a sharing society which is a benefit to everyone and a liability to no one.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a phenomenal thing I read during this week, Wallace, was in regard to the world debt. And essentially, because of the way the money system is designed and set
Mm-hmm.
up, it's actually what it is it's a reflection of the confiscation of the community's actual entitlement to the, if you like, the very long lever of technology. The community's entitlement, the cultural inheritance that says, well, if the machines are doing all the work and man is simply a catalyst, it doesn't stop that the man who works shouldn't be paid. He should be paid. The man who produces should be paid, absolutely, and they should get a profit. But the actual necessity to liquidate those costs, it's a financial requirement, and it's currently being, if you like, um, I'll use the word circumscribed to describe something that's being filched away from the community. That the community should be entitled to liquidate those costs so that the industry is paid, the individual receives their reward, but at the same time, the individuals in community are entitled access to what the productive system actually produces. And that's the anomaly. That's the anomaly that Douglas saw, and he saw it very vividly. This lever of technology is becoming longer and longer. And without a fair and equitable distribution system, similar to or recommended, such as the national dividend, consumer price discount, something like that, so that the financial system reflects what the real world is actually producing. Wallace.
Yes, and the purpose of production is consumption, and then
Hmm.
you can't consume unless the product is not distributed.
Yeah,
In nature, I don't think very many people would deny that the average organism has a right to access uh, the resources of his environment. You wouldn't deny a lion or a cow or whatever the right to eat grass or to whatever a lion does to stay away, to
hmm,
maintain his life.
hmm,
And it seems passing strange that we would deny human beings that right.
hmm.
But we do. We've actually enslaved ourselves to the concept that unless we work for someone else under prescribed conditions,
Hmm.
which may or may not be pleasant, we're not entitled to live.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading the.
Except by taxing
Hmm.
those who have and
Hmm.
redistributing the wealth that's already been produced
Hmm.
without reference to the fact that more wealth is readily available, either by production or just plainly available.
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've just constricted ourselves into an incredibly enslaved environment.
Mm,
We have bound up the abundance of the kingdom.
mm,
We have denied the abundance of nature. We seem to think that the money system reflects reality, and it doesn't.
no,
We could go far, far beyond what the money system permits. It's a system of accountancy, and it is some people have said a two-dimensional art that simply can't represent reality because it's dealing with a three-dimensional world with a
that's right.
two-dimensional art.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. I was going to touch on that industry or production itself is a flow. It's a flow. Nowadays, it's a flow. There was a time when it was just batch processing, like baking a cake. You do one cake
Mm-hmm.
at a time. But then
Mm-hmm.
industry came along, and all of a sudden it was just, well, the machines were making the dough and mixing, and they went around the clock, and it was a flow. And so it is with wages and dividends. They're a flow. But there's always an insufficiency. And in the financial system, that insufficiency is exploited. And it's exploited by placing the community in a sense that they have to take out more debt in order to even purchase what is currently being produced. And it really is a sleight of hand, and it is wrong. It needs to be addressed so that it's held in equilibrium. In other words, the spending power in the hands of the community is in equilibrium with what the community can actually produce. The fact is that the natural resources of the world, the water, the wind, the coal, the iron ore, whatever, the resources that are accessible within the community are actually the if you like an inherent right to a claim to what those resources actually produce. An inherent right to a claim. I don't see a need for, if you like, collective ownership as such of the coal reserves, but I do see that the community is entitled to the benefit of what the coal produces, which is power. I do see that. And the water. The community does need the water. They need it on tap in their home. But at the same time, agriculture may have greater requirements or industry may have greater requirements, but not at the expense of the individual. It's got to be in harmony with it. And that relationship of a community asset has to be put in perspective. It shouldn't be something that is privately held or exploited by corporations. Wallace.
Yes, Arnie, we have always felt in times of scarcity that you are only entitled to what you put into what we perceived as production.
Hmm,
And that is not at all realistic. And it's the source of our downfall in the modern age. As one author, the author of a book called A Matter of Life or Death, said, "Our civilization going to pass just because we can't get our figures straight?"
hmm,
Money is accountancy. We've got to make money reflect reality.
hmm.
And reality is that those goods are sitting there ready to be moved to the consumer. And if
Yeah.
it's to the producer's advantage that it be done,
Hmm.
because it's not a concern to the producer that he necessarily distributes sufficient income to allow consumption. His concern is to sell his product and recover his costs.
That's right.
And if we were to create money as debt and mortgage the future in order to allow those goods to be accessed,
Hmm,
that's one way of letting them be sold. But it
hmm.
is at the expense of inflation and centralized control of the individual, because the individual put into enormous and long-lasting debt. The producer is concerned only about getting the credits to liquidate his costs so that he can pay off his production loan and proceed with another cycle of production.
Mm,
And so it's just we're living in a dream world actually, where many people are so upset about the idea that anyone should get something for nothing. But when you realize that it's being produced for nothing in terms of human expenditure,
hmm.
then are we to turn back the hands of the clock or time and go back to primitive times? Or are we to enjoy the enormous productive capacity that we have
That's right.
and
Mm,
not be so selfish and self centered and narrow minded as to deny our neighbor, who may not be required in the process of production, his due inheritance or portion of that production, which is not due to human
yeah.
factors?
Yeah.
I
Absolutely
mean,
right. Yeah.
we can have a sharing society. People get upset. They think that's socialism.
Mm,
Well, they have to understand that socialism is the state or alleged state ownership of the means of production and administration of production, which is very inefficient, which is tyrannical because it's centralized power. They would rather, it seems, yeah, but at the same time, they're schizophrenic because they complain about the advance of debt. They don't like debt, but they don't like anybody getting something for nothing. Well, the advance of technology is going to put them in a position where they're going to have to make a choice.
that's right.
You simply can't take that position because it's an irrational choice. It simply reflects an inadequate or a wrong conception of reality.
Mm,
And if you're going to buck reality, you're going to end up with a lot of serious problems.
that's
We
right.
may even go extinct.
In the end, the balancing of the books, the balancing of the big books becomes such a conflict within the with if you like within the individual, within the industrialist, within the nation, that nations will attack nations in order to balance their books. It's a form of madness. That's right. Wally, I notice it's
Yes,
nearly
in
35
order to get
minutes.
rid of our tremendous surplus,
Yeah,
we will literally go to war with other nations to force to make an opening for the use and expenditure of our production. But instead of using it for good purpose, we drop it on their heads in the form of bombs or whatever.
Yeah,
And but it does generate incomes,
yeah, that's right.
financial incomes.
Yeah,
But it's an enormous, colossal waste
yeah,
of actual resources.
that's right. We drop them, all of these, in order to balance our books. Let's go through that again, Wally. In order to balance our books, we go and develop all this military hardware. We drop it on our neighbour so that our books will be balanced, rather than actually try and address the issue, this this vagary within the financial system that isn't being addressed. What we've got to do is look at the financial system and address it so that it's in equilibrium. If the industrialist chooses to run his machine for 3 months of the year and all the costs are liquidated, and he turns the machine off for 9 months of the year, is that a problem? It's not,
Well, the
because
Greeks felt that leisure was very important. The Greeks felt that leisure was important to
that's
culture.
right.
It was the meaning of life.
Yeah.
But we seem to be incapable of a normal, natural, and intelligent
Mm,
concept of things. You
that's
know,
right.
if the word psychotic means anything, I really have to say that we are a psychotic species.
Mm,
The way we do things,
mm,
we are amazing.
yeah.
We have really an amazing capacity to develop things, but we seem to turn them back upon ourselves.
Mm,
And it's
mm,
because we have primarily this dreadful concept of this Puritan concept of everything must be earned step by step,
mm. Uh,
completely contrary to the Christian concept,
yeah.
if it were interpreted correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got the capacity, instead of digging a furrow with our bare hands or a blunt instrument or whatever, we developed it to a horse and a plough, to a steam engine, to a electrical, to a petrol engine, diesel engine. We've now got ploughs that are 40 foot wide or even wider, and they're pulled by an eight-wheeled, multi-axled monstrosity. All of these things,
Right.
and yet all of this increment, and we can't actually enjoy it. Every single one of these steps of progression means that we actually can feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, house ourselves with less effort. And yet the financial system sends us back out to work to earn what? To work doing what? When it's already done for us. This is you're right, Wally. It is psychotic.
Yes, since the people have the idea that if your neighbor gets anything for nothing, that he's taking it out of your pocket.
Hmm,
If he's taking something by taxation out of your pocket, that would be true. But when he's simply benefiting by the distribution of something that is created by totally non human factors,
hmm,
it only makes sense and it's absolutely essential that that
hmm.
be arranged through
Yeah,
dividends and compensated prices.
that's right. I think the level of debt, individual, collective, national, world debt, is a reflection of the filching of the financial system of this inheritance. That to me is a reasonably good benchmark. If that debt was not there, but was held in equilibrium through a dividend, in other words, placed into the hands of the consumer, if the debt was not there, all the industry would still be doing it. All the people who worked would still be paid. All the industrialists would still be able to settle their liabilities and pay their bills and liquidate their prices, but the debt would be gone. And that means that they could take some time off. What a
And when
wonderful.
you say, Arnie, that debt represents our stolen inheritance,
Hmm,
I don't know if people were really able to think about it realistically. That is a profound and dreadful realization.
yeah,
That tremendous pilfering of
yeah.
our inheritance.
Yeah, the whole world is in debt because the system was perverted, and it was perverted hundreds of years ago. Wally, we're
Yes.
nearly at the 40-minute mark. I'll call for closing comments.
Well, Arnie, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this because when you think about it, you realize what life could be like, how comfortable it could be, how families could look after themselves in relative comfort, how people would relate to each other without being in abnormal competition and hostile relationships, people as individuals, communities, nations, and how things could work smoothly, and we could be engaged in a more cultural existence where we could be learning and enhancing ourselves as individuals without being on this constant treadmill.
Mm,
It is really something very profound. And
yeah,
that's why I'm so personally dedicated to social credit,
mm,
because I feel that social credit resolves the problem between labor and capital.
mhm.
It resolves the problems of controversy and conflict. It is the basis of peaceful and loving relationships.
Yeah, that's right. It takes into account the individual and communities, and it places them in a position of mutual love and cooperation. That's right. Instead of filching each other, which is exploitive and manipulative. It's been a very good session, Wally, and the four industrial revolutions which are before us, the lever of technology, it gets longer and longer. And mankind, every time he comes up with a new device, a new robotic whatever. They're laying bricks now in Western Australia with a robot arm automatically. They build a house in so many hours, not so many days. It's
But
the
how
tech.
long does it take you to pay for a house?
That's right. That's right. And yet once the house is built, the real cost is paid. This is a very interesting forum. Thank you so much, Wally Klinck from Canada. This is Arnie Luks at the Freedom Forum.
Yes, thank you, Arnie. Nice to be with you.